US has no incentive to cooperate. This is exactly what we see in what Robert Rubin and Greenspan say in 1999 when Ecuador announced that it was dollarizing its economy. When it said that it was dollarizing its economy, Rubin says that, well, you're welcome to use the dollar, but please don't expect the Federal Reserve to take you into account when it sets its interest rate. When it sets its interest rate. In other words, when the U.S. will set its interest rate entirely based on U.S. economic conditions. And Greenspan echo what Robert Rubin said by pointing out we would never put ourselves in a position where we have to assist the rest of the world when we set our own monetary policy. So that's in the case of the US. In the case of the US, because there is no symmetrical spillover, there's no desire by the US to cooperate with the rest of the world. Now, let's look at Europe. What we see in the case of Europe is that in 2011, Germany is the biggest economy, but it is not that much bigger than France and the United Kingdom compared to the way that the US was bigger than Canada or Mexico. Because remember, the United States was 10 times bigger than Canada, and 15 times bigger than Mexico, and 6 times bigger than Brazil. But in this case, none of them is even twice the size of the other. Basically, they are about the same size. Because they are about the same size, it means that what happens in one country, you will impact the conditions in the other country. Largely because that is the definition of big and small in economics. What is a small open economy? A small open economy is an economy that takes international prices as given, whereas a big economy, its action will change international prices as well as its domestic prices. So what we see is that because there's a lot of spillovers within Europe, so what they have done to control the negative impact of spillovers is to have a cooperative arrangement. And this cooperative arrangement is a common currency. We all use one currency. So that there's only one monetary policy. So with this as background, what is the analogy you can think of? The analogy you can think of is a billiard table with 3 balls on it. In the United States, in the North America billiard table, you think of a basketball and 2 ping pong balls. The ping pong balls can shoot against the basketball, but the basketball will not move. But if the basketball were to roll, it will crush the ping pong balls. So this is called asymmetry. Whereas in the case of UK, France, and Germany, they are roughly the same size. If one of them were to roll to hit the other one will also move. Basically, the best billiard player would be able to shoot one ball and you send all the other balls flying. This is what the analogy is of the condition between North America and the case of the European Union. How about Asia? Let's look at East Asia. How does East Asia look like? What we see in East Asia is that in 2011, China is slightly bigger than Japan, well, 6 times bigger than Korea, around 9 times larger than Indonesia. But when you come to 2050, China will be 6 times larger than Japan, compared to only 20%, 30% larger than Japan in 2011. And compared to South Korea, China would be 15 times larger than South Korea. And compared to Indonesia, China would be 8 times larger than Indonesia in 2050. What we see here in this diagram is that you have one, right now, between 2011 and 2030, you have got a situation that looks like in 2011, the situation is like that of the European Union. But by 2030, the situation is more like that of NAFTA. And in 2050, it definitely is the NAFTA situation. So here, China sees that it sees the advantage of cooperation in 2011. But today, 2025, it sees a lot less advantage to cooperating with the other countries in interest rate policy. For the simple reason, the interest rate policies in these other countries have very little impact on China. In fact, by 2050, they would almost have zero impact. So given this outcome, that means that China knows that it should not agree to a monetary union now, because in the future, it will do a lot better if it operates alone. Now, how does the future look like in 2075? Look in the blue color. The United States compare Mexico, Canada, and Brazil. You see, the US still is a lot bigger than the other countries 50 years from now, in 2075. And in the case of the brown color column, which is within Europe, we see that while the size of Germany, of Italy has declined quite a lot, but the truth is France, Germany, UK, they are roughly in the same ballpark. So that means that in 2075, there will continue to be currency unification within Europe. Let's go to East Asia. And in the case of East Asia, we see that the largest is China, and the second largest in East Asia in 2075 is Indonesia. But even then, China is like 4 times larger than Indonesia in 2075. So China has no incentive to enter into a common currency arrangement with its neighbors. So to summarize, East Asia is unlikely to have a common Asian currency because the politics, the economics is against it. For largely because China is big compared to the rest and getting even bigger in relative terms. And what that means is China would not want to coordinate its policy with other countries. It has nothing to gain in coordinating. So that means the prediction there is the individual national currencies will survive. You will not have something like the euro when there is one ASEAN currency. And the second thing is politics is against a Europe sort of situation because the ASEAN countries are not interested in receiving the citizens of other countries to live there. And in fact, what the worry is, if there's free mobility of labor between ASEAN plus 3, what will happen is the Chinese will swamp everybody. So the politics are against the appearance of a European style integration. So what we do see and expect is that there will be a NAFTA type of arrangement in East Asia in the future. There'll be no common Asian currency, and there will be no renminbi block either. In other words, there will, even if other countries are willing to adopt the renminbi as their currency, the renminbi is not going to be set according to the conditions in other countries. It will only take Chinese economic conditions into account. So that means that the idea of an Asian currency, the chances of it appearing is 0. So the first part of the talk is to tell you that the future of East Asia will continue to be characterized by the existence of multiple currencies. The idea of a euro type of arrangement appearing, the possibility of that is very low. Now, having talked about the implausibility of a common Asian currency, let us now talk about what does it mean for the renminbi. And not only are we curious about the future of the renminbi as an international currency, we are also interested in looking at whether Shanghai would become an international financial center, an important international financial center. How likely is that to happen? In order to answer the question about what would be the future role of the renminbi and what will be the fate of the Shanghai financial markets, what I want to do is first define some terms. After we have defined those terms, then we have the vocabulary to answer this question on the screen right now. The first term I want us to know is that we divide up currencies into internationalized currency and non-internationalized currency. Internationalized currency are freely tradable. In other words, you have got an open current account and you got an open capital account. You can send money in and out freely without interference from the government. So currencies like the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc, the Swedish krona are internationalized currency. Among internationalized currency, some of them belong to a special category known as international vehicle currency. The international vehicle currency is an internationalized currency that is used in the settlement of transactions among the other countries and is also held as a reserve currency by other countries. In other words, an international vehicle currency is one that party 2 and party 3 use when they trade with each other. So that is the first terminology I want to introduce ourselves to. The second terminology I want us to know is the difference between an international financial center versus a small group of international financial centers known as the first tier international financial center. In other words, the first level. What is an international financial center? An international financial center is where non-residents can raise capital and purchase instruments issued by non-residents. That means that Argentina can raise money to build railroads by borrowing on the London market. And when it borrows in the London market, it borrows in dollars. And when lending is done in the London market, the borrowing is done in dollars. Even though the two contracting parties do not have the US dollar as their home currency. So that is within the group of international financial centers, there's an elite group which we call the first tier international financial center. Basically, these are the places where the amount of transactions are significantly larger than the other countries. Let me explain what I mean. For example, how many people will come into the Swedish market to borrow money to build railroads in their own country? There'll be almost none. Basically, just because your market is open, it doesn't mean that people want to use it. So international vehicle currency is the case where people come and use your financial market when they borrow or lend to each other. So the financial market is not just for domestic agents. It's also where the foreigners come in and operate. And if we take that definition into account, and in an article by Chung and Yong, they constructed something called a financial services concentration rate index. Basically, they ask how often do foreigners come into your market to enter in transactions with other foreigners. And not only the country 3 and country 4 come operate in your country, they also use your banks. So if you look at the values, you see that if New York City is 100, UK is 90, and Japan, which is number 3, is only 1/3 that of the US and the UK. Basically, there's a huge qualitative difference that put the US and UK in one category and all the others in a different category. Basically, the others only cater to their domestic agents, or they are money laundry center. Look at Switzerland. Everybody talks about Switzerland being an international financial center, but people don't go to Switzerland to borrow money to build railroads in their country. They go there to launder their money. So that's why, Singapore has taken over that position now by 2023. But the fact is, an international financial center is not just where you launder money, but you actually raise money to build factories, to finance infrastructure. So you could see that when you are a center where people come to get financing to build infrastructure, the number is very big. 190 versus Japan. Japan is third, largely because the Japanese economy is big. So the domestic component is big, but the international component is not anywhere in the league of London or New York. So we call the US and UK the first level financial center. And all the others are just financial centers, nothing unusual. So that is what the basis of this showing you of this definition. Now, let me talk about what does the literature say about the necessary conditions to be a financial center, first level financial center. And we also talk about, given what I have shown you, what hypothesis can you think of? And the third thing I want to talk about is, does the government need to do anything to turn it into a financial center besides opening the capital accounts? Well, if you look at the literature, they say that if you want to be an international financial center, the three conditions you got to have. One of them is the market is open. Foreigners can bring their money in and bring their money out unrestricted. Anytime they want to speculate, they bring their money in, and when they are in a panic, they run away, but you still keep it open. First is open. The second is sophisticated. You got many kinds of financial instruments for people to invest in. That's why they come. They buy not only stocks and bonds, they can also issue insurance, and they could trade in derivatives. The third requirement is the market has to be safe. Basically, the central bank regulates the transactions so that cheating is avoided. And if cheating is found, there's a legal framework that is predictable and transparent and objective. Basically, when people put money in your country, they want to be sure that if something happens, they can go to a competent legal authority that would deliver economically sensible ruling in a short period of time. And of course, among another condition is that you got to have price stability. In other words, if the dollar, if the US inflation rate is 500%, you definitely don't want to hold the dollar. You don't want to deposit your money in US banks. So the three conditions is open, sophisticated, and safe. But on that condition, the Stockholm stock market would fulfill that condition. The Stockholm stock market is open, is sophisticated, and is safe. But Stockholm is not a first level international financial center. And you could see that in the case of Toronto forex market is open, sophisticated, and safe, but it is not in the level of New York and London. Why? Here, I think an observation by Charles Kinderberger is very appropriate. Charles Kinderberger, the late Charles Kinderberger, was professor of economics at MIT. And he made the following observation. Whether you like it or not, which currency that you should use, it depends on whether other people are also using that currency. Like, which foreign language should you learn if you learn only one foreign language? One sensible thing is, which is the most commonly spoken foreign language? And whichever is the most common, that's the one I learn. So it means that the economic size of a country is important. When your country is big, you trade a lot, so people have to deal with you. And when people have to deal with you, there's a possibility that they will use your currency. So let's look at the history of how currencies, the vehicle currencies have changed. Because in 1914, the pound of the United Kingdom was the world's primary international vehicle currency. The franc and Deutschmark are used in their own colonies. But in countries that are not colonies, like the Latin American countries, what currency do they use when they settle international trade? They use the British pound. So fact number one, in 1914, the British pound was the world's number one international vehicle currency. The United States dollar was certainly not a vehicle currency. London was the world's only first level international financial center. New York was not even an important international financial center on the outbreak of World War I. So, but when you come to 10 years later, well, let us see what happens in 1914. 1914 was when World War I broke up, and the war ended in 1919 after 5 years. But 5 years after the war ended, which is 10 years after 1914, what we see is that the pound is no longer the vehicle currency of the world. The dollar has displaced the pound as the international vehicle currency. So why? The reason is because by 1924, the UK economy was a lot larger than the US economy, pardon me, by 2024, the US economy was a lot larger than the UK economy. And today, the pound is certainly no longer an international vehicle currency. And if you look at the ratio between US and UK, the US is 6 times larger than the UK. But what is interesting to note is that even though the pound is no longer a vehicle currency, London continues to be a first level financial center. Why? Why is that the case? Well, we can have the following hypothesis to explain what I have just shown you. What I've shown you is how the pound began as the only vehicle currency, but within 10 years after 1914, it was no longer an important currency. In 1914, London was a first-level international financial center. In 1924, it was still a first-level financial center. And today, it is still a first-level international financial center. Why? Well, one easy reason that explains both of this is to think about there's economies of scale when in the use of a currency. Because when you use a certain currency, there are transaction costs involved. But if the transaction cost declines with the size of the market. The average cost declines with the size of the market. Then that currency will be the only currency left at the end. Then there is also economies of scale, which will explain why London is still an international financial center. Because if there's economies of scale, that meant that anybody who wants to become international financial center, the time when it begins, it has got low volumes, and so its average cost is much higher than London. And because its average cost is much higher than London, London keeps its position. So the important concept here is to explain why London is still an international financial center is to talk about economies of scale. Let me now ask the question of what factors could prevent China from achieving the international vehicle currency status and achieving the first level international financial market status. Well, what's the key variable that we want to focus on? The key variable we want to focus on is what is the relative economic size of China in the future. Because the Kinderberger observation is that size finally wins, which is why the United States, the US dollar, in the end, beat the UK pound because the US economy got a lot larger than the UK economy. So let's look at the relative economic strength. The relative economic strength of China against the United States is just the size of China's GDP over the size of US GDP. This ratio can be decomposed into 4 variables. The first one is that it is the ratio of the GDP is equals to the following 2 terms multiplying each other. The first one is what is the relative living standard in each country? So the living standard in China divided by the living standard in the US times the amount of labor in China divided compared to the United States. So if you look at the relative strength of today, China has a population that's 4.3 times larger than the US. And the living standard of China is roughly 20% of that of the US. So if you look at the strength of China versus the US, it is roughly 1, basically equal 0.86. 0.86 is basically 0.9, and 0.9 is basically also 1. Now, so this is the relative economic strength. Given, in other words, China is almost as big as the United States, but it is not so big that it is the giant compared to the United States. That's the present situation. They are in fact the same size, the ratio of 1. But if you compute the relative economic strength in 2075, we know that China's population growth rate is slowing down. The prediction is that 50 years from now, in 2075, China's population compared to the US population will decline from 4.3 today to 3.2 in 2075. And how about the difference in living standard? The difference in living standard, would uh, would come from two scenarios. One is what I call the middle income scenario. In other words, the living standard of China goes up to 0.3 and gets stuck at 0.3, 30% of US level. And this is the this is the stagnant situation known as the middle income trap. Why did I pick the number 30%? I picked the number 30% is because if you take the 5 largest countries of Latin America and you take the average of their living standard, the average living standard in Latin America compared to the US was 30% in 1950, 30% in 1980, and 30% today. This is what is meant by middle income trap. You are not closing the gap between you and the rich country. The rich country grows and you grow at the same rate. So this is the Latin American phenomenon. And the other one is the successful catching up, where the country goes from 0.2 to 0.8. This is the case of South Korea, the case of Japan. They are able to catch up. The question is, will China be able to catch up? So if China is unable to catch up in the middle income strength, then its ratio, GDP ratio, would be 0.96, which basically is 1. You can stay what the ratio is today. Scenario B, with that is catching up. That means that the ratio in the living standard is 2.56. Is 2.56 large enough to overcome the inertia of switching currency? In the data I showed you before, the US-UK ratio in 1914 was 2.1. In other words, in 1914, the US was already twice the size of the UK. But still, the dollar was not a weaker currency. Only the pound was. But by 1924, the US-UK GDP ratio had climbed from 2.1 to 3.2. And it keeps on increasing. So what that means is that 3.2 is certainly big enough. But China's strength, if it's managed to catch up, it reaches a maximum of 2.56. So 2.56 is higher than 2.1, which is not high enough, but it's lower than 3.2, which is definitely high enough to allow the currency to be widely used. The question is 2.56 big enough? Well, 2.56 is in between the is between 2.1 and 3.2. So what it means is, with relative economic strength at 2.6, the renminbi might become the weaker currency. But it does not get a lot bigger than 2.6. If it does not get a lot bigger than 2.6, they might not be able to push the market to adopt the renminbi as the same status as the United States. So what can the government do? the government will have to increase the demand by foreigners for renminbi. What you can do is whatever goods that the Chinese have market power in, China will set the price of that good in renminbi. And because right now, when Malaysia export anything, it will set the prices in terms of US dollars. So China, up until recently, when it sells its products, the prices are in US dollars. Now what has happened is where the US has got market power, the US where China has market power, pardon, I didn't mean the US. What it could do is to demand that the settlement be in renminbi rather than US dollar. And when China lends out money through the BRI program, that it should denominate the debt in renminbi rather than US dollar. Look at the Bandung-Jakarta high-speed rail. It was built with a loan from China. And is the loan written in rupiah, renminbi, or the US dollar? Does anybody know? The answer is the loan that Indonesia took up from China in order to build the high-speed rail is in the denomination of that contract is US dollars. So in such a situation, since China is lending money, not borrowing money. So what it can say is if other countries want to borrow money, they're welcome to be helped, but the debt has to be stated in renminbi and not in US dollars. That would be how the government could promote the use of the renminbi. Now let's talk about what is the reluctance of China to open up its capital markets. Because as you know, that China, you cannot send money into China easily, nor can you take it out easily after you have put it in. The question is, China admits that it should start opening the financial markets to foreign banks and foreign financial institutions. But it is making sure that when they come in, that the stock financial markets will still be stable. Well, some people feel you should not open, some people feel you should open, but the question is, how long can you debate before you start implementing the policy? If there is no time limit, then you can take your time in fixing the financial markets before opening it up. But if there is a time limit, like the appearance of a competitor, that means that China would have to open its foreign exchange account. Now, let me ask this question. There is only right now one major international weaker currency, that is the dollar. The runners-up is the euro, but the amount of the euro is minuscule compared with the amount denominated in dollars. We could explain the dominance of the dollar by appealing to the economies of scale. In other words, if you have the first lesson, one of the lessons you learn in microeconomics is if an industry has a declining marginal cost curve, the marginal cost curve keeps going down, what will happen in the final equilibrium? In the final equilibrium, there will only be one firm left. This is the natural monopoly. He has driven out everybody. He's able to drive them out because it's the biggest, so his average cost is the lowest. And because his average cost is the lowest, the others cannot compete, and so they have to exit. And the outcome is only one firm is left. If that is the case, then why are there two international financial centers of roughly the same size? Because I have been justifying everything I say by appealing to the existence of economies of scale. If they actually, what they say is true, if what I say is true, then economies of scale would result in the outcome of only one currency, one international currency, and one first level international financial market. But instead, we see two international financial markets. Why? Well, this is because of the fact that the world is round. If you can accept the hypothesis that it is more expensive to run a foreign exchange market in the nighttime than in the daytime. In other words, the average cost of operating the daytime in New York is lower than the cost for operating nighttime in New York. And similarly, the cost of running the daytime in London is lower than the average cost of operating in New York in the day at night. Basically, the world is round. When it is nighttime in New York, it could still be daytime in London and vice versa. And because the cost of operation depends on the time of the day, so that means that when it is nighttime in New York, it is still daytime in London, and the cost of operating in London is lower than, no, the cost of operating in New York is lower than in London, because New York is in the day, London is in the night. So because that the daytime cost is lower than the nighttime cost, the result is we have two firms. But there are times when both the London market and the New York market are closed. So that means there has to be another first level international financial center that is open when both New York and London are closed. So there has to be, so where would that third location be? That location would be in Asia. In other words, there are many times where both New York and London are asleep and Asia is open. So if Asia is open, then you can have 24 hours trading of stocks. Now, the question is, which city would become the first level international financial city, along with New York and London? By geography, it could be Beijing, Tokyo, Seoul, Sydney, or Mumbai, or Jakarta, because Jakarta is awake for during some times when both New York and London are asleep. So, which one would it be? Well, then you look at the largest economies in the East Asia region. The largest is China, so China is a competitor. The other one is India. India is also a competitor. And on that right, let me confirm what Goldman Sachs say the rest of how the world would look like in 2022. If you look at the world in 2075, sorry, I misspoke. The study by Goldman Sachs is 2022, but they are talking about what is the situation in 2075. You see, 1, 2, 3, they are both slightly above $50 trillion. The fourth largest economy in the world, predicted for 2075 by Goldman Sachs, is no other than Indonesia. But Indonesia is number 4, but look at it, 13.7 compared to 51 for the United States. That means that the United States is still 4 times larger than Indonesia. You have got a big difference. So it means, and the more important thing is China and India are roughly the same size. So size will therefore not be the determining factor whether that stock market will be, the first level stock market is in Shanghai or in Mumbai. It's a question of who can reach there first. Whoever can become an international financial center will have lower average cost than when the other person begins. Because whoever has started, your scale of transactions is bigger. Because the scale of transactions is bigger, you block out the other guy from starting his business. So what we see is that both China and India are going to be roughly the equal size. So the important thing is who is going to be an international financial center first. That means that what you should be competing is which market can make itself open, sophisticated, and safe first. Would the Shanghai market be able to achieve this goal first, be open, sophisticated, and safe? Will it be able to achieve these characteristics before India, or would India be able to do it? Whoever is able to achieve this will block the development of the other one. So what that means is China should hurry up, because if India moves first, then the first level international financial market will be in Mumbai, and the financial industry as a driver of growth is denied to China. So let me recapitulate, which is that the things that could happen to prevent China from achieving both the status of international currency and the status of the first level international financial center is that if China is caught in a middle income trap, then for sure the financial industry in China will not reach the first level as it could. And the other thing is China will have to move faster than India. If China delays further and India moves ahead, then the third first level international financial market will be in India rather than China. So let's see. Oh. So here we come to the last slide, which is that what is the likely future? The likely future is the rupiah is not going to disappear. It will coexist together with the renminbi, and it's also to be predicted that an Asian monetary fund will be inevitably be established, because what is an Asian monetary fund? It is like the firefighting station. And the question is, how many firefighting stations should you have? The question is, how many can you afford? And Asia can certainly afford an Asian monetary fund, unlike Africa, which is too poor to be able to set up an African monetary fund. And the last point I want to make is that there is room for one more first level international financial center, and it comes down to it is a race between the renminbi and the rupee, the renminbi of China and the rupee of India. And here it hinges on which of this country will be able to make its financial markets open, sophisticated, and safe first. Well, I think that's all I have, and I would be most happy to take your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wing. Thank you so much, Professor Wu. It's really eye-opening, and it's been a while not thinking about this plausibility of Asian Monetary Union, or um, what's next, I think, right? So I think we can have like half an hour Q&A. Please, if there is any questions, maybe raise your hand first online. Any question? Okay, Delbert, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Professor Hu. I really want to ask about China. In the future, China, maybe when you say about the currency, the vehicle currency for renminbi, it means if you use renminbi as the vehicle currency, it should be a lot of people using renminbi, right? So when a lot of people using renminbi, it means that the renminbi will appreciate. When it appreciate, the cost of production will increase. So what do you think? Will the China product be more expensive in the future? And how it affects the future of China? Thank you so much.
Well, the renminbi would appreciate, but my question is, in order to get the renminbi, what must you do? Because why do you want the renminbi? You want the renminbi so that when you trade with Malaysia, you buy Malaysian goods with renminbi, because you don't just hold it. You want the renminbi so that you can use it in your own transactions, right? So how do you get your renminbi in the first place? That means you have shipped some goods to China, and China give you a piece of paper that you use when you trade with Malaysia, when you trade with the Philippines. So let me ask you, what is the cost of printing renminbi versus the cost of making a product? The product is more valuable than a piece of paper. So the Chinese gave you a piece of paper, so they got a free product from you. So just because Chinese goods is more expensive, but the fact is they are getting this positive inflow of goods. In economics, that is called seigniorage. Seignnorage. S-E-I-G-N-O-R-A-G-E. In other words, you make a profit by issuing the currency and receiving goods in return. So you have got one benefit, which is that you get free goods. Then you got a cost. The cost is you sell less of your own goods. Which is the benefit bigger than this? Is the first benefit bigger than the second cost? Most likely, yes. And so it is okay that it has appreciated. Right. Have I answered
Thank
your
you so much,
question?
Professor Hu. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
it's a really good answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delbert. Okay, any more questions? Anyone? You're being shy, I think. Chrysalin, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Bu Kiki, and thank you, Professor Wing, for the presentation and lecture. So I think what was interesting was that I was introduced with the concept of relative economic strength, especially in comparison to the US. And you mentioned that the maximum point of China's, well, relative economic strength is 2.76. But what my question is something related to China's technological developments, considering that, you know, we have DeepSeek and their generative AI's development. So I'm curious, to what extent do you think that these technological developments can change the dynamics of China's relative economic strength? And with these technological developments, is there a greater possibility that it can lead to China having more of a competitive advantage to reach the one IFC position? That'll be my question, Prof.
Well, AI will certainly increase the productivity of the country. So my question is, would China end up being a stronger AI country than the United States? Right now, who is ahead, the United States or China in AI?
I think it's still the United States.
It's still the United States. And you would have to predict that the US is going to suffer some harm to its AI sector. That's why the Chinese can catch up and exceed it. So what Donald Trump is doing may hurt the AI industry. For example, he's attacking education. He's cutting funding for research. But in the case of the US, what is important to note is that the private sector is so rich. What the government doesn't fund, the private sector can fund. And when the private sector funds it, then then they will continue to keep the US ahead in that field. The outcome, of course, is that both will get bigger. But there is no reason, I do not think that the displacement of the US as the number one country in AI is going to happen anytime soon. Of course, when we talk about AI, we talk about it in quite positive terms, that it will increase productivity and makes GNP bigger. But one should also talk about the danger that AI exists and that AI poses. So if AI can lead to a big problem, the danger that we talk about, like for example, look at computer-based trading, because many brokerage would computerize will put in program trading. Program trading can cause about a collapse of the market. Actually, that's what happened in 2008. We see that the downward spiral, because all of these firms, their computers were doing the trading, and when something goes down, it follows the down and pushes it down some more. So if a big accident were to happen in China, then AI would have harmed China rather than helped China. Right now, we all seem to be so optimistic that AI will have only positive outcome. It could have negative outcome because AI will lead to a fall in job creation. A lot of people will be laid off. And if the laid off leads to social instability, then the economy would certainly suffer if there is social political instability. Because social political instability means that people will stop investing. And when people stop investing, growth cannot occur. So there are two parts to what I just replied. The first part is AI may cause accidents, and hence there's a cost. So people may there may be restrictions on use of AI. That is maybe 10% possible. But the one that is maybe more than 50% possible is that the use of AI could lead to social instability because of the loss of jobs. The poor will become poorer when that happens. And if there's rioting, then it certainly would cause the GDP of the country to stagnate. So AI would have led to stagnation in such a case.
All right. Thank you, Prof. As a follow-up, all right.
Okay, thank you.
She has a follow-up questions, Prof. Wing.
Yes, go ahead.
Is it okay?
Of
Okay.
course.
All right. So there were actually something related to what you mentioned, that, how AI is related to social instability and all of that stuff. But my question is, what do you think is the most appropriate policy then for China to apply? And out of the three factors that relates to the condition of the IVC, which is open, sophisticated, and safe, which do you think China should prioritize and relate to their policy?
I think the main reason why China has been reluctant to open is because the China's financial sector is controlled by state-owned banks. And the state-owned banks are used by the government to support many political projects. And so the banks have a lot of non-performing loans. And once they let in foreign firms, the entry of foreign firms with no non-performing loans, what does that mean? When you got a lot of non-performing loans, that means you got to charge a higher interest rate, because to cover the fact that some of the loans are not making a return. Whereas the foreign firms do not have non-performing loans, they will charge a lower interest rate than the domestic firms. And if they charge a lower interest rate than domestic firms, they will kill the domestic industry. So the Chinese government will have to recapitalize all its banks and possibly stop using them as stop letting them support loss-making enterprises. So there has to be a reform of its banking sector in order to make them competitive. And clearly, which of the three things you talk about? Open, safe, sophisticated. Basically, how open is easy because all you got to do is to say you can bring money in, we'll permit it, and if you want to take money out, we'll permit it. That can be done overnight. How about making it safe? Making it safe means that you got to have a judiciary system that people trust. And as you could see, that in the case of China, the judiciary system is very government biased. Not many people have sued the government and won a case. Although that is happening in the US too. The Supreme Court has been ruling for Donald Trump in the last few major cases. Yeah, and what you do is you should try to move on all three fronts rather than to do one first and then do the other. You should try to make progress on each front because some of them can be done overnight, like the opening of the market of the account, but making something safe takes a long time, and making something sophisticated also takes time. And you need the private sector to be able to come up with new products. And that's what China is missing. The participation of the private sector in the financial markets.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Aline. Great questions. Any more questions? Oh, Abraham.
Okay, thank you for your time, Professor. Recently, as we know, China's booming economy has relied on its competitive, export-driven economy by Beijing keeping the RMB weak to support its manufacturing trade. Yet, if China moves to become the international vehicle currency, wouldn't it risk undermining its advantage? Even like right now, if I'm not wrong, Donald Trump wants to devalue the dollar in order to make its export much more competitive, but is unsuccessful. And with recent news is that China's domestic purchasing power is rather weak, even in especially with the recent what do you call it, housing crisis. The question is the domestic consumption strong enough to compensate for the reduce in export competitiveness? Or is the goal to internationalize the RMB conflicting with its industrial strategy? Thank you.
I think that the strategy of grow through investments. Investments means creation of more production capacity. And when you have more production capacity, you have to be able to sell the goods. If you cannot sell the goods, then you have invested wrongly. And what China has focused on is growth and a focus on investment. And that is unfortunately something that cannot be done to the same degree as before because people are now closing their markets to Chinese goods. And that process cannot continue. Basically, you would say that China's strong emphasis on growth led to its focus on investment. But the investment in turn produces goods that have to be sold. But unfortunately, the present level of income, they cannot buy all the goods that are produced. And that has come from a distortion of government policy, that the state-owned enterprises tendency is to always increase investment. Why? If I'm the manager of a state-owned enterprise, how can I get promoted? I get promoted when I show them I'm able to be a good manager. And how can I show I'm a good manager? I double the size of my factory so that I can tell people, look, under my watch, we got bigger, but and let us talk about a state enterprise factory manager. If he makes an investment and the investment is successful, that shows how great he is, and he is promoted. If he make an investment and the investment is not successful, you can always think of an excuse of why you were not successful this time. And after all, if the factory goes under, it's not your factory anyway. The government will bail you out because the government will not let a state-owned factory close. So there's always a tendency for overinvestment in a government, in an economy that has a lot of state-owned enterprises. That is, if you look up in the literature, the term is soft budget constraint, because when the state enterprises lose money, the government bails it out. And as long as the government bails it out, there's no check on overinvestment. Whereas in a private firm, which the government doesn't bail out, it will be more careful about making investment. And hence, overcapacity does not appear as easily. Like, let's take another example. China, as you know, has the longest high-speed train system in the world. And China announced we are going to double the length of high-speed railroads in 5 years. Now, in order to build high-speed train, what is the difference of building high-speed train from ordinary trains? High-speed trains means that you have to have very straight and level tracks. You cannot lay it on the ground because the ground is not level. So in order to keep it straight and level, you've got to put the track on a bed of concrete. So the demand for iron and cement will go up tremendously. So where should the production of additional iron and cement come from? One way is to invest in order to produce enough cement and iron within 5 years. But what happened after 5 years, after you have already built that high-speed train? You have overcapacity, right? If the firm was privately owned, the owner would not take the order of the cement and the iron. The owner will say, I will only take half of your order, and we will import the other half from abroad. Or they say, I will take your order, but I will deliver it over 10 years instead of 5 years. Why? Because in order to deliver the cement and iron to you, I have to increase investment. And I have to realize that after the completion of the project, who do I sell to? That is a consideration that a private sector firm would have to think about, whereas state factory would not have to think about that. In fact, if you double the size of your factory in order to meet the demand of the railroads, you get promoted. And so after the railroad is completed, the factory no longer has customer, you are no longer in charge anyway. So that's your successor's problem. So that is this particular aspect in the investment-driven nature of Chinese growth.
Great, thank you so much, Prof. Wing. No, more questions? Still have maybe like around 10 minutes.
Well,
No
I must say your students are very patient to sit through 2 hours, an hour and a half.
But I was testing with Ibu Mari. Thank God we bring you, Professor Wing, because then we can get to know more about Asia's perspective, Chinese perspective, which is not always easily get in terms for students. Ibu Mari actually has some questions. Do you want to shoot?
Yeah. Wing, let me ask you a question about some of the initiatives coming out of BRICS. I think you have given us a really good insight into potential for de-dollarization and the yuan as a reserve currency. But as you know, in the BRICS initiative, apart from that, they also have 2 other initiatives that you may wish to comment on. One is going towards basically the use of currency as a reserve currency, the use of currency in trade. And at the moment, most of trade is being conducted in dollars. But there has been an initiative for what they call local currency settlement, where if I'm buying from China, I can go rupiah to yuan directly. Or yuan to rupiah directly without going through the dollar, which was the pattern of the past. And actually, Indonesia and Malaysia and some other ASEAN countries, I think, already have some kind of arrangement where you can have local currency settlement. So what's your view on that, and how likely is that going to develop? Because right now China is already our biggest trading partner, and it's for most ASEAN countries, it's also the biggest trading partner. The second question is related to the settlement system, the payment system, right? Which they are also trying to recommend. This is mainly because of Russia, to not use the SWIFT messaging system, but to come up with an alternative payment settlement system. And how realistic do you think that is? And I think they also had a third initiative, which was kind of like a Chiang Mai initiative, but for BRICS countries. So like a currency, what is it called? Currency reserve arrangement. Yeah, so that it's like the swap in case of a crisis, you can draw on this as reserve. So these are just it's kind of like finding the alternative to what is known as the traditional dollar-based and IMF-based pay system. So just wanting to know what you think about all these BRICS initiatives.
Let's take up the first one. The first one is there is direct transactions between the rupiah and the renminbi, between the ringgit and renminbi. Now, the question is, why isn't there direct transaction between rupiah and ringgit? The reason is because the volume that in that particular market is a lot lower than the volume between rupiah and renminbi and ringgit and renminbi. And the average cost of transaction goes down with the number of transactions. In other words, the marginal cost curve is sloping downwards, economies of scale. So when there was very little trade with China, when you want to trade with China, you go into the dollar, and from the dollar, you go into renminbi. That's the old days. But because of the increase in trade now with China, so that is the cost of going directly is cheaper than before. In other words, the reason why they had to go into dollar, then from dollar they switched to renminbi, is because of transaction cost. Because the volume of transaction in the old days between China and Indonesia was quite low. And now it has reached a high enough level that the costs have come down. And because the costs have come down, it makes sense to deal directly. And of course, a market has to be set up, and a market is successfully set up because the cost is lower now. If you had tried to set up that mechanism in the past, you would find it to have been cheaper to go through the dollar. So it's because of the growth of China, which led to a lot more trade being done. And that is one reason. The second reason is that the world in general wants to diversify away from risk. That means that you want to hold your wealth in more than one major currency. There is a demand for something else besides the dollar. And especially since the US Treasury has started weaponizing the dollar. Like, for example, we think that you are not so friendly to the US, we grab your bank accounts in the US banks. And so the safety of the dollar is in question. And so the demand for an alternative storage of wealth has gone up. And that in turn leads to the promotion of direct market between other currencies and the renminbi rather than going through the dollar. The second one has to do with bypassing SWIFT. Well, why is there more than one bank in the world? There's more than one bank in the world because banking makes a lot of money and there's competition. So why shouldn't there be competition with SWIFT? Unless you think that the economies of scale are very large in the SWIFT system. If that is true, then it will be very costly to switch out of SWIFT. But the fact that you are able to do it means that the economies of scale element is not that large in SWIFT. That is what my guess is. And as a matter of safety as well, why should there be, like even post office, there used to be one person who delivers the mail, but now you have got Federal Express and other providers, and the competition leads to lower cost. So it is not clear that SWIFT is the lowest cost provider of this service that it is engaged in. which means that the development alternatives to SWIFT, I think, is much easier to be done than the first one, which is setting up the direct currency market, because that one you really need scale in order to bring down the transaction costs sufficiently. And what was the third question? Sorry. Was there a third question, Mark?
Yeah, a reserve currency for BRICS, like the Chiang Mai initiative. So, I mean, Chiang Mai hasn't really worked either because they still has to be linked to the IMF.
That's what they agreed to do. Well, I think until the Asian Monetary Fund is set up, you need an external referee. So far, there's no Asian Monetary Fund. So the IMF is the only one in the game. After we set up the Asian Monetary Fund, then I think it need not be linked to IMF. Largely because when people pool money as pool reserves, they want to make sure that when it is lent to another country, it is for the right reason. It's not because I'm willing to lend you money if you are attacked by financial contagion. But if you had made a huge policy mistake that necessarily result in a loss, giving you the money is tossing it away. And I need a referee to pre-qualify you for the loan. And that's why you need someone to pre-qualify you, and who is around to pre-qualify you. That's only the IMF. So if you have got an AMF, then the IMF would naturally lose that role of being the objective assessor of why something happens. But in general, the objective assessor means it is a diagnosis of what went wrong, or diagnosis. And the question is, if I'm sick, shouldn't I seek a second opinion? So having an AMF is not a bad idea at all. Basically, if the IMF tells me one thing, and if the other guy says a different thing, well, we will be able to have a better assessment.
Can I ask some follow-up questions on that?
Yes.
So we do already have like Chiang Mai initiatives within ASEAN, I think, right? Like that kind of like a predecessor of Asian Monetary Fund. But in that sense, you imply that without Chiang Mai initiatives moving to Asian Monetary Fund, meaning that they need to kind of like collect some fund, Chiang Mai initiatives is basically non-credible.
As long as it is stuck to the IMF condition. So it's like giving additional money to the IMF to manage.
But I thought it's independent. Okay, but good. Okay, got it.
No, because a small loan can be made without going to the IMF.
True.
If a big loan above a certain size,
True.
it is linked to the IMF.
Well, we hope that we're never going to like borrow again from the IMF.
Well, but
I agree that having the risk.
No, do not borrow is not necessarily the right thing. You want a competent doctor.
Yeah.
The IMF was the doctor.
Yeah.
You want a competent doctor.
Yeah. Okay. Any more question?
Kak Kiki, can I ask a question?
Yes. Syahda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Wu. First of all, thank you very much for your very insightful presentation and lecture. I think from your presentation, I think the renminbi currency is unlikely to replace the US dollar domination soon. But if at some point the renminbi or another currency
could started to gain their dominant status, what simple like threshold or maybe a red lines that we should watch for Asian countries, particularly the emerging markets, should watch that would trigger any concern. For example, maybe trade invoicing basis or the reserves share of that currency to the total currency. I think maybe Asian countries particularly need lessons to avoid a very one-sided dominance to a currency or like a regional scheme. Maybe that's my question, Professor Wu. Thank you.
Very good. You know, it's like there's a Cold War going on now. So should you choose US or should you choose China? The question is, I choose both. After all, just like a good Muslim having 4 wives, you know. Now, let's look at this, why you choose both. In fact, you can do better than that. You are going to be able to pick 3. Do you know why? Do you remember I show you the slide of the 10 largest countries in 2075? What was the first 3? India was in it, and it was in the 50 trillion. And what was country number 4? Indonesia. And that was 13 trillion. You could see that a third major currency will now also appear, and that is the rupee. So the rupee, the renminbi, and the rupiah are all candidates. So I think that we, as a matter of safety, you should have a diversification of currency holdings. And so the answer to your question is that it's unlikely that there will be one dominant. There will be 3 major currencies. And none of them will have 66% of the market, like the US dollar now is like 66% of all foreign exchange holdings, foreign reserves holdings. Because the Chinese economy is going to be as big as the US, and so is the Indian. And their trade will be just as large. So I think that in the future, there will be 3 major currencies. But I think a 4th will be there, because you must understand, we got to look at the euro as representing a united Europe. And the united Europe will be at least as big as India, China, or the United States. So we end up being very Muslim. 4. Renminbi, rupiah, euro, US dollar. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
Yes, Professor Wu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. More question? I think we run out of time actually. So to close the session, I would like to ask for a group picture, maybe if you don't mind. Please kindly turn on your camera. And then I'll make, because there are a lot of you guys, so maybe I'll make like 3 rounds of pictures, and I'm going to let me pin Prof. Wu first. Oh, no, maybe not. Wait a second. Okay, gallery.
Now we know who has fallen asleep when I talk.
Actually, they at least they all stayed.
And very good questions, yeah.
Yeah, great class, great questions, class.
That's why I predicted that the students will overtake their teachers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yes, that's what we want. Okay, I have some more now. Okay, good. I'm going to take first picture now. 1, 2, 3, big smile. Okay. One more, maybe 4 times. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me just move to the next round.
Oh,
Oh,
Banyak nih.
is that possible?
Adi Harsono has just bombed the picture.
Oh,
He's just listening to you.
Hi, Paddy. I met Paddy yesterday. Thank you for attending my talk.
He didn't invite me. The speaker invited me.
Paddy. Okay, one more. 1, 2, 3. Big smile. Okay, one last one. I think some of you. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I got everyone, hopefully. All right, thank you, Prof. Wing Wu, for your talks and for sharing your knowledge. This is really wonderful experience for the students. Thank you, class, for attending the class. Good luck for next week exam. We will announce.
Yeah, good luck. Thank you again,
luck.
thank
Wing.
you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night, Wing. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.